Imagine being dragged out of your own home at 73 by your own son because he thought you were just a burden. But what he didn't expect was that his mother still had the fight, the dignity, and the heart to take back her life and find a new family in the most unexpected place. Welcome to her Fireside Stories, wishing you a wonderful listening experience. I never expected my own flesh and blood to become my greatest adversary, but there I was at 73 years old, strapped into a wheelchair, like a criminal rolling down a spotless hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale regret. My name is Abigail LaFleur, and I had just learned the most painful truth of my life. The people you love the most can hurt you in ways you'd never imagine. My son Tristan had decided he was done checking in on me and plucked me out of my beloved home as if I were an old lamp collecting dust in the attic. He claimed it was for my own good, but every time I met his eyes, I saw a flicker of something that felt more like guilt than concern. Perhaps he knew this new nursing facility was less about helping me and more about helping his own busy schedule. Or maybe the guilt was just my wishful thinking, holding on to the hope that my only son still had some love left for me. I used to have silver white hair that fell past my shoulders in gentle waves. Now, in this sanitized new environment, my hair was pinned back into a neat, functional chignon by the intake nurse, a style that felt more like an institutional mandate than personal choice. Tristan stood there, arms crossed, watching as they asked me question after question. How many fingers am I holding up? Do you know what day of the week it is? Have you taken your blood pressure medication? He answered for me half the time, which only solidified their impression that I was too frail to speak for myself. In truth, my mind was as sharp as ever. My knees ached from arthritis, not senility. That was the first day I arrived at Willow Acres. I stared at the bland, egg-white walls and realized everything in this place was designed to fade into the background. No personality, no color, just a quiet assimilation into the system. My clothes were placed in a small chest of drawers, neatly labeled by the staff, with my name like a dorm room but infinitely lonelier. Tristan made no mention of whether he'd visit tomorrow or next week. All he said was, "They'll take good care of you." Mom patted my hand and left me with a million questions echoing in my head. I knew exactly why he'd done it. Tristan always had a penchant for efficiency, for checks and balances, for ensuring every loose end in his life was tied up before it could cause him any inconvenience. My living alone in the house where my late husband Gareth and I built our happiest memories had become in his mind a liability. I had taken a small tumble a few weeks earlier, tripped on a rug in the living room, and though I wasn't seriously hurt, it was enough for Tristan to pounce. He showed up at my doorstep at dawn with the paperwork already signed. He said it was time for a change, that he was doing what was best for me, as if I hadn't been living independently for years. As they wheeled me into my new room, I thought back to my younger days, when Gareth used to tease me about how fiercely I guarded my independence. I pictured his disheveled, sandy brown hair. He always kept it short, parted to one side, and his amused grin whenever I'd insist on doing everything myself, from fixing leaky faucets to climbing ladders to clean gutters. "Abby, one day you'll learn to accept help," he'd say, only half joking. But even then, he admired my stubborn streak. We raised Tristan in that house, filled every corner with laughter, books, music, and the smell of fresh bread from my weekly baking spree. Now that chapter felt like it had been ripped away. Even so, I tried to keep my composure as a nurse carefully guided me to the bed. Her name tag read Sandra, but I barely registered her features. She had short, curly hair that framed her face, a style that would have been lovely under different circumstances. For now, though, I saw no kindness in her forced professional smile. I wondered if all the staff here were trained to keep that clinical detachment a barrier between themselves and people like me, people who were no longer considered fully functional. My heart pounded like a war drum, and my stomach churned. The room was tidy, the bedding crisp, the curtains a dull shade of beige, and the silence. It was suffocating. On the nightstand, someone had placed a plastic cup of water and a stack of forms. My name was printed on a label stuck to the door, like I was inventory. In that moment, I promised myself that no matter what Tristan and this place demanded, I would not be reduced to a ghost. In the dark hours of that first night, I felt my anger turning into something else resolve. They thought I was just an old woman with arthritic knees and a failing memory, but my mind was alert and my spirit was alive. Tristan might have made the first move, but I had an entire lifetime of resourcefulness to draw upon. I would watch, listen, plan, and remind them all that I wasn't done fighting for my life yet. Around midnight, I heard distant wails from another resident, a soft, consoling voice from a passing nurse. Then silence again. I stared at the ceiling, noticing the faint flicker of fluorescent lights in the hallway. I wondered if Tristan was at home, tucked in bed, relieved to have me off his plate. A pang of loneliness crept in, but I swallowed it down. I reminded myself that Gareth used to say, "Abigail, you were born to persevere," and I clung to his words like a life raft. Within these sterile walls, I felt the first sparks of a plan forming. I remembered that the law gave me certain rights. I might have been forcibly put here, but I could still manage my own affairs if I remained vigilant. There was no telling how far Tristan would go to keep me tucked away, but I'd outmaneuver him, because sometimes quiet determination can be more powerful than raw defiance. I would love to know what you think so far. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Despite the lingering sadness, I closed my eyes and slept fitfully, determined to seize whatever chance I got to protect my legacy. I had no clue that my greatest ally would enter my life the very next morning with a kind heart and a fresh perspective that would eventually change everything. The sun was barely up when Alina King entered my room, clipboard in hand, wearing light blue scrubs and an expression that was far from guarded or mechanical. Her hair was cut in a stylish chin-length layered bob with subtle caramel highlights, practical for her demanding job, but still lively. She had a certain glow about her. Unlike most of the staff, she actually met my eyes as though she was seeing me, not just another bed number. "Good morning, Mrs. LaFleur," she said, voice gentle yet clear. "I'm Alina, one of the new day shift nurses. I'll be checking in on you." I lifted my gaze. "You can call me Abigail," I replied. "The formality makes me feel like a medical chart." She smiled, and it was genuine. "Sure thing." "Abigail, is there anything you need?" I hesitated. The night before, I'd been steeling myself for a battle, convinced that every staff member here would be complicit in Tristan's plan to keep me tucked away. But Alina's kindness chipped a tiny crack in my defenses. "I'd like to speak with someone about my living situation," I murmured, choosing my words carefully. "I'm not sure if you can help, but I'd appreciate any direction you could offer." She nodded. "I can't make any big promises, but I'll listen," she said, pulling a chair closer so we were at eye level. "Tell me what's on your mind." That was all the invitation I needed. For the next 20 minutes, I recounted the story of Tristan, whisking me away, the papers I didn't even get to read before he had me placed in Willow Acres, and my fear that this was just the beginning of a deeper plan to control my estate. Alina listened intently occasionally, making notes on her clipboard. She didn't look skeptical. If anything, she looked concerned. "I've seen this before." She finally admitted, her eyes betraying a flicker of sadness. "Sometimes family members want to ensure safety. Other times, it's about power." She exhaled. "I promise to help where I can. Abigail, you shouldn't be alone in this." That small spark of genuine humanity from Alina might have been the first real warmth I'd felt since arriving. I was so used to politeness laced with condescension that her direct compassion caught me off guard. And as she left to tend to other residents, I realized how starved for connection I had become. Later that day, I ventured out of my room and into the common area, determined not to languish behind closed doors. The communal space was a large lounge filled with a scattering of chairs, a wall-mounted television tuned to a talk show, and a few round tables where some residents played cards or dozed off. The windows were wide, but heavy drapes blocked most of the natural light. I caught a glimpse of Alina making her rounds, her posture relaxed, yet purposeful. Even in the gloom, she seemed to carry a light around her. I parked myself at a table near the window, pretending to read a magazine. But in truth, I was studying the environment, observing how staff interacted with residents, noticing who might be approachable or who seemed too worn out to care. An older gentleman sitting nearby chuckled aloud at something on the TV. Another woman snored softly, a crocheted blanket draped over her lap. If I wasn't careful, I'd become part of that background hum, another relic in the collection of neglected souls. I thumbed through the magazine, forcing myself not to let despair settle in. I still had moves left to make. I had my lawyer's number written in an old address book. But Tristan had taken my cell phone for safekeeping, leaving me with no direct line to the outside world. The facility had a public phone at the reception desk, but any calls I made could be overheard. If I were going to protect my assets, especially the house Gareth and I built, I needed privacy, and that meant I needed allies. One of the orderlies approached offering me watered-down orange juice. I declined politely, stating I'd get my own drink later, wanting to assert even the tiniest scrap of independence. It was sometime in the late afternoon when Alina found me again, her shift winding down. She invited me for a walk in the small courtyard garden at the back of Willow Acres. I leaned on a cane that they'd insisted I use, even though I didn't really need it. Alina stayed close, but not so close as to crowd me. Once outside, the sunlight warmed my cheeks, and the scent of marigolds tickled my nose. The garden was modest, just a few raised flower beds and a bench under a willow tree. But it offered a temporary escape from the sterile hallways. As we strolled, Alina told me a little about herself. She was 29, a single mom, and had recently moved to this part of town after her own mother passed away. She wore her hair in that practical layered bob because she had to juggle so many responsibilities. Long hair just got in the way. Her openness put me at ease. Before I knew it, I was sharing my memories of Gareth. I told her about how he used to joke that I was unstoppable, how we'd dance in the living room on Friday nights, how we planned to travel in our retirement but never got around to it before he died of a sudden heart attack. Alina listened genuinely. She didn't give me that pitying look so many people do when you mention a deceased spouse. She just absorbed my words as if they mattered. By the end of our walk, I felt like I'd made a true friend in a place that felt otherwise cold. I was still furious at Tristan, still determined to unravel whatever scheme he'd orchestrated, but knowing I had Alina's ear gave me hope. Alina had to clock out, but she squeezed my hand gently before leaving. "I'm here for you, Abigail," she said simply. "Don't hesitate to call on me." That night after dinner, I returned to my room and stared at the handful of items that represented my entire life within these walls: a framed photo of Gareth and me, a small stash of crocheting supplies, and a well-worn notebook in which I jotted down daily thoughts. In that moment, I made a decision to step forward more boldly. Tristan was not going to dictate the rest of my life. If he thought he could stash me here indefinitely, he was sorely mistaken. The next day, I cornered Shauna, the receptionist, a well-meaning young woman with dyed pink hair pulled into a ponytail, and asked if I could use the phone in her office. She hesitated, eyeing me with caution, possibly under orders from Tristan or the administration, but I summoned every ounce of maternal authority and insisted I had a personal matter to attend to. My tone brokered no argument. Finally, she relented. I dialed the number of my longtime lawyer, Marvin Reed, a patient man in his 60s who had handled everything from Gareth's will to some minor real estate transactions for us. When he answered, I breathed a sigh of relief. Marvin, I need your help, I began, keeping my voice low. Something is not right here, and I want to make changes to my estate immediately. Marvin asked a slew of questions, his tone growing more alarmed as I explained Tristan's actions. We arranged for him to visit, though I suspected the facility might try to block him, so we planned to meet off-site if necessary, perhaps at a local cafe near Willow Acres. I hung up, feeling a surge of adrenaline. Back in my room, I locked the door, sat on my bed, and planned I wanted to make Alina my power of attorney for healthcare decisions, at least temporarily, until I could sort out whether Tristan had done anything else behind my back. I also wanted to rewrite my will, leaving significant assets to Alina. The notion might seem drastic, but my heart told me she was trustworthy in a way that Tristan was not. If nothing else, I would use this threat of a will change to jolt him into treating me with some semblance of respect. My opportunity to act arrived sooner than expected. Marvin called me back 2 days later to say he was in town ready to drop by for a consultation I'd arranged for him to come during visiting hours. The problem was Tristan also decided to make an appearance that same afternoon, likely to check in on my mental state, or more accurately, to remind me who held the reins. I was in the lobby when Tristan walked in wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly stay at Willow Acres. His hair, a crisp short cut parted neatly on the side, glimmered under the fluorescent lights, and he carried a leather briefcase. For a moment, I recalled the little boy who once needed my help tying his shoelaces. Now he was a polished man with an icy gleam in his eye. Mother, he greeted me, leaning in for a stiff peck on the cheek. How are they treating you? He said it as if I were a guest at a five-star hotel. I forced a polite smile. I manage, I replied, scanning the corridor for Marvin. You're here on business, I assume. He shrugged, feigning nonchalance. I just wanted to ensure everything is in order. I've been speaking with the staff and they say you're doing fine. Before I could respond, Marvin strode in. He was an older man with salt and pepper hair, wearing a slightly frayed navy blazer. Tristan immediately tensed, eyes darting between us. What's this about? He demanded, his voice a shade too loud. Marvin extended a hand. Mr. LaFleur, good to see you. Abigail invited me. Tristan looked at me, a flicker of alarm crossing his face. We should talk privately, Mother. I was about to lead Marvin down the hallway toward the conference room, but Tristan placed himself in front of me, physically blocking our path. There's no need for a lawyer, he stated. We're just ensuring your comfort. Remember. I inhaled, steadying myself. I have every right to consult my attorney, I said, feeling my pulse thrum in my ears. Please step aside. Tristan did step aside, albeit reluctantly. We led Marvin into a small conference room typically used for staff meetings. The plain white walls made me feel as if I were in an interrogation cell, but at least we had privacy. Tristan tried to follow us in, but Marvin firmly said, I'm sorry, but Abigail has requested a confidential consultation. Tristan's nostrils flared in annoyance, but he left. Once the door clicked shut, Marvin pulled out a stack of forms. I'm prepared to help you amend your will, he said, but are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Yes, I answered without hesitation. I am of sound mind. I'm certain Tristan is trying to gain control of my finances and confine me here. I intend to designate a new beneficiary, someone who actually cares if I live or die. Marvin's eyebrows rose slightly. Alina King, correct. I remember you mentioning her, a nurse who's been kind to you. Yes, I confirmed. It might seem impulsive, but I've seen more genuine kindness from that young woman in a few weeks than I've seen from Tristan in years. Marvin nodded, scribbling notes. We'll also file for a separate healthcare directive naming Alina as your primary advocate. That way, if anyone tries to claim you're incompetent, she'll have legal standing to push back. A wave of relief and trepidation washed over me. I was doing something drastic, something that would undoubtedly escalate the tension with Tristan, but I was also taking back my power. Marvin and I spent the next hour drafting the necessary documents. By the time we finished, I felt equal parts liberated and terrified. I was essentially declaring war on my son, but I refused to be a pawn in his game any longer. I would stand up for myself and for the life Gareth and I had built, even if it meant burning the last remaining bridge with Tristan. When we emerged from the conference room, Tristan was waiting in the hallway. Arms crossed, jaw clenched. "Mother, a word," he said curtly, ignoring Marvin. Marvin gave me a supportive nod, then walked away. I faced Tristan, noticing the tension in his posture. "What is it?" I asked, determined not to show the trembling I felt inside. "What exactly did you just do?" Tristan demanded, keeping his voice low, but laced with anger. "Why do you even need a lawyer in a place like this?" I met his gaze squarely. "I'm ensuring my affairs are in order." "That's my right, isn't it?" His cheek twitched. "Is that Nurse Alina putting ideas in your head?" "You're too isolated, Mother. You need to listen to me. I'm your family." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Funny, you didn't act much like family when you carted me off here without warning. If you truly cared, you would have heard me out. Instead, you're more concerned about what I do with my assets." Tristan's gaze flickered. He glanced around, ensuring no one else was listening. "You're not thinking clearly. You had a fall, and let's be honest, your judgment might be compromised. How do we know this lawyer isn't taking advantage of you?" I could feel anger welling up in my chest, but I forced it down. "Watch your tone," I said evenly. "You talk about my mental state, but it's clear you just want to control everything. If you truly believed I was incompetent, you would have consulted me with compassion. Instead, you used my minor fall as ammunition to put me here." He backed away, voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You're making a mistake. If you keep going down this road, it won't end well for you." "Is that a threat?" I asked quietly. Tristan didn't answer. He glanced over my shoulder, nodded at someone behind me, then turned on his heel and left. My heart pounded as I realized he was capable of doing far worse than dropping me off here. He was cunning, and I couldn't let my guard down for a second. Word travels fast in Willow Acres, especially when there's even a whiff of confrontation. Over the next few days, I noticed how certain staff members grew cautious around me. They'd speak in hushed tones or hurry away when I tried to engage them in conversation. I suspected Tristan had given them instructions, maybe painted me as a hysterical woman prone to confusion or aggression. But Alina was different. She continued her gentle, unwavering approach. She never treated me like a fragile senior, nor did she pry for details of what happened between Tristan and me. Instead, she told me about her personal life in small doses. Her 6-year-old daughter, Rosie, who adored building block castles and insisted on wearing mismatched socks every day. Alina confessed that being a single mom could be exhausting, but she wouldn't trade it for anything. One afternoon, she found me in the courtyard staring at the cloudy sky. She sat beside me on the wooden bench, slipping off her shoes to let her feet rest on the cool grass. "Tough day?" she asked, noticing the grim set of my jaw. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Tristan's determined to paint me as unstable. I can see it in how people look at me now. It's like they're waiting for me to lash out or start babbling nonsense." Alina exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wish I could change how the system works. But what I can do is listen and help where possible." Her quiet sincerity moved me. She wasn't offering grand promises or easy solutions. She was offering empathy, and sometimes that's what matters most. I told her about the new will I had drafted. I'd hinted that she would have a significant role, but I hadn't told her outright that I planned to name her as a major beneficiary. Part of me worried she'd think it was too much too soon. Another part of me feared she'd reject it out of principle, but I trusted my instincts. I gazed at the subdued colors of the courtyard, the drooping rose bushes, the leaves gathering on the stone path. I resolved to show her just how serious I was when the time was right. That very night, a creeping sense of vulnerability kept me awake. I heard footsteps in the hallway, orderlies, nurses who knew, but each shuffle made me question if Tristan had found a way to accelerate his plans. Was he pushing the administration to declare me mentally incompetent? Could he bribe a doctor to sign off on it? I had to be ready for anything. Slipping out of bed, I pulled out the notebook where I'd been documenting every strange interaction and conversation. Paper trails don't lie, Gareth used to say when he dealt with tough negotiations at work. Maybe that advice would save me now. I even noted the names of staff members who'd shown me kindness like Alina and Shauna, and those who seemed wary or suspicious. Finally, after jotting down everything I could recall, I felt a grim sense of calm. If Tristan tried to paint me as delusional, I'd have a record of it. If he tried to gain guardianship or declare me incompetent, I'd show a judge my meticulously kept diary. Exhaustion overcame me, and I eventually slipped into a restless sleep. In my dreams, I saw Gareth standing on our old porch waving to me with that familiar grin. He didn't speak, but he didn't have to. The dream ended, and I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. Morning brought routine checks from the nurses, a bland breakfast in the cafeteria, and the usual mild chatter in the lounge. Everything seemed ordinary from the outside, but inside me every muscle was tensed for a fight I knew Tristan wouldn't sit idly by while I dismantled his carefully laid plans. The only question was when he'd make his next move and how savage it would be. 2 days later, I got my answer. Around noon, Alina hurried into my room, looking uncharacteristically rattled. Her eyes were wide and her usually steady voice wavered. Abigail, I just got word that you're being transferred, she said, to the psychiatric ward in the South Wing. My heart lurched as though someone had punched me in the chest. On what grounds? I demanded, anger surging through my veins. Alina swallowed hard. They're claiming you've been exhibiting signs of paranoia, refusing medication and, well, that you had an outburst in the hallway. But I know that never happened. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the nightstand. This is Tristan's doing. He's paying someone off to write false reports. Or maybe forging signatures. Possibly, Alina said softly, but we need proof. She ran a hand through her hair, which had come partially undone from its usual neat layering. Listen, I'll help you any way I can. But if they decide you need to be in that ward for your own safety, it'll be very hard to contest. I felt the walls closing in. The South Wing was notoriously stricter, a place where residents could be heavily medicated and monitored. If Tristan got me in there, I'd have almost no freedom to reach out to Marvin or anyone else. Alina noticed my panicked expression. I can try to get you a quick phone call, she said, but we have to be careful. We don't want them to say we're both conspiring. Despite my terror, I managed a bitter laugh. We are conspiring for my own survival. She squeezed my hand, then briskly left the room, presumably to stall whoever was coming for me. I took a deep breath, forcing my mind to function. My best chance was to contact Marvin and have him file an immediate petition to review my mental competency. If I could get a judge involved swiftly, there was a chance they'd block the forced psychiatric move. Yet deep down, I knew Tristan's hold was strong. He'd always been strategic, and he wasn't above twisting the system for his benefit. Within the hour, 2 orderlies arrived with a wheelchair and a somber-faced nurse who I'd never met before. They informed me in a clipped tone that Dr. Greenwood had signed off on a transfer to the psychiatric unit for observation. My requests to speak with Dr. Greenwood in person were brushed aside, and soon I found myself being wheeled down a hallway that felt darker, narrower. The corridor leading to the south wing had a locked door with a security keypad. One of the orderlies punched in a code and the door buzzed open with an ominous click. We passed through, and my breath caught at the stark difference in atmosphere. The lights were harsher, the walls painted a dull gray-green. I spotted a few residents wandering aimlessly, each accompanied by a staff member. Their eyes seemed distant or vacant, as though sedation had taken them somewhere far away. They placed me in a small room with a single bed, bolted to the floor, and a window fitted with reinforced glass. No personal items were allowed except for a small duffel bag containing underwear, a nightgown, and toiletries. My notebook, crocheting supplies, and even my favorite pen were confiscated. I felt stripped of everything that anchored me. A thin nurse with dark pinned-up hair walked in holding a cup of pills. "It's just a mild sedative to help you adjust," she said mechanically. When I refused, she gave me a practiced frown. "Mrs. LaFleur, I suggest you cooperate, or we'll have to note it in your record." I shook my head. "I'm not taking anything until I speak to a lawyer." She paused for a moment, then sighed and exited the room. I stared at the pale walls, the fluorescent light overhead, and realized just how far Tristan was willing to go. He wanted me declared incompetent, just one step away from complete guardianship, which would let him tear up any will or financial arrangement I'd made. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through me. One wrong move, and they could keep me here indefinitely. That night, I barely slept. Every creak, every footstep in the hallway amplified my sense of entrapment. Occasionally, I'd hear someone sobbing in the distance. My mind flickered with images of Gareth Tristan as a child. Even Alina's kind smile. I wondered if Tristan had ever truly loved me, or if love had long ago been replaced by greed. By morning, I was prepared to do whatever it took to break free of this ward. I had been calm thus far, but if they forced medication on me, I risked losing the ability to think clearly. They could label me agitated or violent, and that would just strengthen their case for keeping me here. I had to maintain my composure, present myself as a sane, rational woman. Shortly after lunch, if you could call the tasteless mush they served lunch, I caught sight of Alina in the hallway, arguing quietly with the unit supervisor. She spotted me through the glass panel of my door, her eyes reflecting worry and determination. She didn't look away. Instead, she made a small gesture to her chest, tapping twice. I didn't know what it meant at the time, but it felt like a promise. "I haven't abandoned you." Hours passed. A doctor I'd never met popped in to ask questions about my mental state, and I responded calmly, politely. I said I was here under a misjudgment and wished to speak to my lawyer. He scribbled notes without meeting my eyes. Then he left. As the day dragged into evening, I felt the creeping edges of despair. This was exactly the scenario. Tristan wanted me locked away with no easy recourse, but somewhere beyond these walls, Alina was fighting for me. And if Tristan thought he'd already won, he was about to learn the hardest lesson of all. A mother can be pushed only so far before she pushes back twice as hard. I was dozing off when a night nurse shuffled into my room, her expression uncommonly gentle for this environment. She glanced over her shoulder before speaking, voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, there's a visitor asking for you." Normally, we don't allow visitors at this hour, but, well, she seemed insistent. My heart soared. "Alina," I guessed, even as I felt a twinge of guilt knowing she might risk her job by doing this. The nurse nodded. "Yes, but I can only let you speak briefly and not here." She led me to a small office near the back, away from the main corridor. My arthritic knees ached with each step, but I moved as quickly as I could manage. Inside the office, Alina waited, arms crossed over her scrubs, her gaze flicking between me and the door as though expecting an interruption. The nurse said, "I'll stand guard. 5 minutes?" Then she closed the door. Alina wasted no time. "I have news, good and bad," she said, her voice clipped with urgency. "Marvin's filed a petition with the court for an emergency competency hearing. It's scheduled for next week." Relief coursed through me momentarily, easing the tight knot in my chest. That's the good news. She nodded. Yes, the bad news is that Tristan came by earlier, bragging to the facility's director that he'll make sure you're declared unfit. He thinks once you're legally incompetent, he can reverse every change you made to your will. Alina lowered her voice further. He's trying to get the hearing moved up possibly to tomorrow, so you won't have time to gather evidence. My jaw clenched. I need my notebook, my documentation. They confiscated it. Alina's eyes flickered with determination. I'll see what I can do. In the meantime, I've managed to gather statements from a couple of staff members who overheard Tristan's demands, and I also have an audio recording. What I whispered, barely believing it. Alina pulled out her phone. Tristan was reckless. He spoke openly near the nurse's station. I had my phone recording by accident. I was dictating patient notes. She offered a small smile. Talk about fate. My pulse quickened. That recording could be the linchpin in proving Tristan's malicious intent. Alina placed a small USB drive in my hand. I copied it just in case. We'll get it to Marvin. Hope surged within me, but I also felt the weight of Alina's bravery. She was risking her job, possibly her entire career, to stand up for me. I don't know how to thank you, I said, my voice cracking with emotion. Alina reached out, gently touching my shoulder. Don't thank me. When I first met you, I saw someone who deserved respect and who wasn't being given it. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. A soft knock on the door signaled our time was up. The nurse peeked in, nodding briskly. Alina squeezed my hand and quietly slipped out, leaving me with the USB drive clenched in my palm like a priceless jewel. Back in my room, I tucked it inside my pillowcase. The fortress Tristan had built around me suddenly felt penetrable. I had evidence now, hard, undeniable proof. I considered the risk, the horrifying possibility that Tristan might escalate further if he knew I had this. But I also considered that if I stayed silent, he'd win without a fight. Sleep remained elusive. I kept picturing the upcoming hearing, the possibility of a judge peering down at me, scrutinizing my every word and gesture. Tristan would likely present a psychiatrist or doctor who'd claim I was delusional. But I had more than my own testimony. Now I had staff willing to speak up, and I had an audio recording of Tristan's cold, calculating intentions in his own words. In the early hours of the morning, exhaustion finally overcame me, and I drifted off with a spark of cautious optimism. Maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point. I dreamed again of Gareth. Only this time, we weren't on our porch. We were in a garden, planting seedlings under a warm sun, and he turned to me, his blue eyes filled with pride. Keep fighting, Abby. I heard him say, his voice echoing in my mind as I floated between sleep and wakefulness. Keep fighting. The next day was a haze of tension. Morning medication rounds, bland breakfast, a pointless group therapy session where a tired counselor asked half-hearted questions about our feelings. I answered politely, mindful that any resistance might be twisted into uncooperative behavior. By midday, the rumor mill churned with news that my emergency competency hearing might be moved up to that afternoon. Panic fluttered in my chest, but I recalled the USB drive hidden in my pillowcase and Alina's promise to gather statements. I reminded myself to stay calm, no sudden outbursts. Around lunchtime, a stern-faced orderly informed me that I was to be transported to the courthouse at 2:00 p.m. My heart thudded, but outwardly I nodded politely. That gave me an hour, maybe a little more, to ensure I had everything I needed. But how could I retrieve the USB drive without alerting them? Would they frisk me before escorting me out? I decided to hide it in the waistband of my pants, wrapping it in a thin cloth so it wouldn't show. If they confiscated personal items, they'd likely look in a bag not on my person. At least I hoped that was the case. When I was finally escorted out to the transport van, My hands shook, but not just from fear. They shook with anticipation. This was the moment Tristan had forced upon me, and I intended to use it against him. Two orderlies, both bulky men, sat in the front, exchanging casual remarks about the traffic as if they weren't carrying a woman to a hearing that could lock her away indefinitely. I whispered a silent prayer to Gareth, to the universe, whoever might be listening, begging for strength. Because by the end of this day, either I'd be free or Tristan would have sealed my fate once and for all. The courthouse itself was nondescript, a gray building with a faded flag outside, a cluster of reporters scanning arrivals for any sign of a salacious story. I was ushered through a side entrance, perhaps to avoid the media. An officer escorted me to a small waiting area where I spotted Alina and Marvin already seated. My heart lifted seeing them together. Alina rose, a folder clutched in her hands. She gave me a quick once-over, her eyes betraying relief that I was at least physically unharmed. "We have the evidence," she whispered. "We'll present the statements and the recording. Stay strong." Marvin nodded, extending a supportive hand. "Let's keep this straightforward. Don't let Tristan provoke you into an emotional outburst. You're just as competent as ever. Let's prove it calmly." They led me into the small courtroom, a cramped space with fluorescent lighting and dark wood paneling. The judge, Judge Armitage, a stern-looking woman in her late 50s, presided from the bench. Tristan was already seated with his attorney, a slick-looking man in a tailored suit. Tristan's eyes flicked toward me, but he quickly turned away. I noticed a faint smirk on his lips, which made my stomach churn. The proceedings began. Tristan's attorney called a psychiatrist who claimed I was confused, prone to delusions, and hostile to care. He cited questionable medical notes from Willow Acres. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to breathe to remain expressionless. Then came our turn. Marvin rose and introduced affidavits from several staff members, each disputing the alleged incidents in my record. Alina provided a written statement detailing how Tristan had orchestrated my move to the psychiatric ward. Finally, Marvin asked if the court would permit an audio recording. After some hesitation, the judge allowed it. Tristan's own words crackled through the courtroom speakers. "She's just an old woman easily manipulated. Once I get her declared incompetent, I'll reverse every change she's made to the will." A hush fell over the room. Tristan went pale, his attorney leaping up to object. But the damage was done. Judge Armitage's gaze shifted to Tristan with thinly veiled disapproval. When the recording ended, the silence felt like a living thing, thick and oppressive. Even Tristan's attorney seemed momentarily stunned. Judge Armitage cleared her throat and fixed her cool stare on Tristan. "Mr. Lafleur care to explain that statement?" Tristan's attorney stammered. "It's out of context. My client was concerned about outside influences on his mother. He used poor wording." "Your Honor," Marvin, his voice unwavering, responded, "this is more than poor wording. This is evidence of a deliberate strategy to commit elder abuse by isolating and medicating a fully competent adult. We also have witness statements that Ms. Lafleur has shown no signs of instability." The judge raised a hand to silence further bickering. She then turned her attention to me. "Mrs. Lafleur, in your own words, can you describe your current state of mind and why you believe your son has acted in bad faith?" My throat felt dry, but I stood meeting her gaze. "Your Honor, I'm 73, but my mind is as clear as it ever was. I had a small fall, nothing catastrophic yet. My son used it to place me in a nursing facility against my will. When I sought legal advice, he escalated matters by having me put in a psychiatric ward, claiming I was unwell. I refused to be stripped of my rights and my dignity by someone who seems more concerned with my assets than my well-being." I paused, feeling a wave of sadness wash over me. I'm not above needing help sometimes. I'm older and I do appreciate genuine care. But Tristan's actions weren't about caring. They were about control. I've had to rely on the kindness of a nurse, Alina King, just to stay sane in that place. If that doesn't speak volumes about my son's intentions, I don't know what does. The judge studied me for a long moment. Thank you, Mrs. LaFleur. She glanced at Tristan, who looked ready to combust. I'll review the arguments, the recording, and the affidavits. We'll have a brief recess. She rose and exited, leaving the rest of us in the tense hush of the courtroom. As I sank back into my seat, Alina squeezed my hand, offering silent reassurance. The recess felt like an eternity. Alina, Marvin, and I waited in a small corner of the courtroom while Tristan and his attorney engaged in a quiet but heated exchange. I couldn't hear their words, but Tristan's posture spoke volumes. He was livid eventually. The bailiff ushered everyone back in. Judge Armitage returned to her seat, her expression unreadable. She rapped her gavel for order and then began her ruling. I've reviewed the evidence, including testimony documentation and an audio recording that paints a troubling picture of Mr. LaFleur's intentions. It appears there is no legitimate basis to deem Mrs. LaFleur incompetent. Indeed, the claims of delusion and paranoia seem contrived as corroborated by staff members and the nurse's testimony. A hush fell over the room. Alina squeezed my arm so tightly I almost winced. Therefore, the judge continued, I find Mrs. LaFleur to be fully competent. I see no grounds for psychiatric commitment or guardianship. Furthermore, given the evidence suggesting Mr. LaFleur attempted to manipulate her living situation for personal gain, I am recommending that any further dispute over Mrs. LaFleur's estate be handled under close judicial scrutiny. She turned her gaze to Tristan. Mr. LaFleur, consider yourself fortunate that your mother is not pursuing criminal charges. Should you continue to interfere with her rights or well-being, you may find yourself in a legal predicament beyond civil litigation. My heart pounded so loudly, I barely heard the rest of her statement. It was over. The judge had seen through Tristan's facade. A rush of relief flooded my system, and for a moment, I worried I might faint from the intensity of it all. She tapped her gavel again. Court is adjourned. Tristan stood stiffly, his face a tempest of anger, humiliation, and something else, perhaps fear. He cast me one venomous look and then stormed out without a word. Alina let out a breath she'd been holding. We won, she whispered, barely containing her exhilaration. Marvin gave me a warm nod, satisfaction written all over his time-worn features. I wanted to weep from relief, but I held my composure. The bailiff escorted me out of the courtroom, and in the corridor, I finally allowed myself a moment to exhale. Marvin squeezed my hand. You did great, Abigail. You stood firm. I glanced around, half expecting Tristan to reappear with some last-minute drama, but he was gone. I felt a mix of triumph and sorrow. My only child had tried to destroy my autonomy. A part of me still mourned the little boy. I once nurtured the child who used to run around our backyard in knee-high socks, collecting fireflies in a jar. But that boy was nowhere to be found, and the man who just tried to lock me away. Alina turned to me. What happens now? I sighed, shoulders sagging from the emotional toll. I'm free from the psychiatric ward at least. I can return to Willow Acres if I choose, or maybe find another arrangement. For now, I might recover a few personal things there, but I'm not staying in a place that was complicit with Tristan. I can't trust them. Marvin interjected. We can make arrangements to transfer you to a smaller assisted living home, or even explore the option of in-home care if you prefer. You've still got resources, Abigail. I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. Actually, I've got more than resources now. I've got a real friend I turned to, Alina, who looked slightly embarrassed by the praise. You've done so much for me, Alina. I want you to know I'm serious about changing my will and adopting you as my legal daughter, if you'll have me. She blinked, eyes going wide. Adoption, Abigail. That's huge. You don't have to. I placed a hand on her arm. I know I don't have to. I want to. You gave me dignity when no one else would. You fought for me when my own son turned his back. That's more family than blood has ever been. Alina was speechless, her eyes brimming with emotion. Marvin Ever, the pragmatic lawyer, quietly said, "We can start the paperwork. Adult adoption is not unheard of, though it'll require some steps. And of course, your newly updated will can reflect your wishes accordingly." We walked out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun, a gentle breeze rustling the trees. I could breathe freely for the first time in what felt like months. Alina insisted on driving me back to Willow Acres so I could collect my belongings. She didn't trust the facility to handle it ethically. "I'll be right by your side," she promised. At Willow Acres, I was greeted with awkward stares from administrators and staff who'd likely heard the outcome of the hearing. No one overtly challenged me, though. I was free to pack up my things. Alina helped me gather clothes, books, photo albums, everything that made me me. As I reached for a framed photo of Gareth and me from our wedding day, I felt a pang of nostalgia. He would have loved Alina. He might have teased her for taking such a big risk, but he would have admired her courage. Within an hour, my boxes were stacked neatly near the entrance. A nurse I barely recognized came up to me, mumbling an apology for any misunderstandings. I simply said, "I hope you treat the next person better," and left it at that. A small crowd watched as I wheeled out the last of my possessions. Some of the residents waved goodbye, likely not fully grasping my situation, but sensing my departure meant a sliver of hope. Maybe one day they too could leave under better circumstances. Alina and I loaded everything into her car. It was surreal to think I had arrived here like a prisoner, forcibly removed from my home, and now I was leaving on my own terms. As the car pulled away, I looked back at Willow Acres one last time, the building's bland exterior seeming to shrink in the rearview mirror. A few days later, Marvin met Alina and me at a quaint cafe near my old neighborhood. Over hot tea and scones, we pored over the legal documents. The adult adoption papers would take some time, but the will changes were more immediate. I signed and dated the final draft, legally naming Alina King as my primary beneficiary in place of Tristan. I also added a clause that protected the home Gareth and I had built, the same one Tristan had tried to leverage. There was a moment as I clicked the pen shut where I wondered if I was betraying Tristan or if I was simply safeguarding myself. The truth was, Tristan had done the betraying long before I made these decisions. I couldn't cling to the idea of him as a dutiful son anymore. That image was gone. In the end, I did what felt right, and maybe that was all that mattered. Alina initially argued I didn't have to leave her anything. She insisted she didn't want to look like a gold digger or an opportunist. But I assured her that money or property was just a side note. The real inheritance was my trust, my gratitude, and a chance for her to build a stable life for her daughter. Rosie Gareth would have approved. I told her, my voice trembling. "He always said we should help those who genuinely care about people. You do that every day as a nurse." Marvin said he'd file the necessary paperwork immediately. Once everything was final, Tristan could contest it, but given the court ruling, his chances were slim. Nonetheless, I mentally braced for more drama. People with Tristan's level of entitlement rarely go quietly, but for now I allowed myself a moment of peace. We left the cafe with the sun shining brightly. Alina drove me to her small apartment to show me Rosie's paintings taped on the fridge. I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that had been missing for too long. Over the following weeks, Alina helped me transition into a lovely apartment in a senior-friendly complex. It wasn't a home in the sense of the house Gareth and I built, but it was cozy and full of light. Better yet, it was on my own terms. I chose the furniture, the curtains, even the color of the throw pillows. No one slapped a label with my name on the door. I wasn't inmate number 452. I was just Abigail again. Rosie visited often, her bright laughter filling the space. She adored my crocheted blankets, and I even taught her how to finger knit a simple scarf. In the evenings, Alina and I would share a cup of tea on the small balcony, looking out at the city lights, and talking about everything from nursing shifts to our favorite classic novels. My silver hair, no longer pinned into a severe chignon, was free to fall in soft waves. I felt like I was reclaiming the bits of my identity that had been chipped away. Sure enough, Tristan made one last attempt to overturn my new will, filing a petition that claimed I was under undue influence from Alina. The court promptly dismissed it after reviewing the evidence from my competency hearing. Each step he took now only served to erode his own credibility. I heard through mutual contacts that Tristan's business deals were faltering, and rumor had it he was spiraling into financial trouble. A part of me felt pity despite everything. He was still my son, but pity wasn't enough to erase what he'd done. On a crisp autumn afternoon, I stood in my new living room, gazing at a photo of Gareth. A swirl of nostalgia washed over me. "I hope you're proud," I whispered. I didn't let him tear me down. In my mind's eye, I could almost see Gareth's approving nod, his voice reminding me that my worth was never defined by my age or by Tristan's attitude. That evening, Alina, Rosie, and I ordered pizza and watched an old musical on TV. We laughed until our stomachs hurt, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I wasn't worried about what tomorrow would bring. Months passed and life began to feel normal, better than normal. Actually, Alina officially became Alina King LaFleur. The adoption was finalized in a modest ceremony at the county clerk's office, with Rosie as a gleeful witness. I cried tears of joy, a mix of disbelief and gratitude coursing through me. Who would have guessed that the nurse who first greeted me at Willow Acres would become my legally recognized daughter, filling a void I never thought could be filled again? My days fell into a peaceful rhythm. Some mornings, Alina and I would have breakfast together before she headed to work. Other times, I'd babysit Rosie in the afternoons, helping her with schoolwork or baking chocolate chip cookies, exchanges that nourished my soul in ways I couldn't describe. Gareth's memory lived on in little details. The garden Alina and I started on the apartment balcony, filled with basil thyme and small pots of flowers. The vintage record player I'd salvaged from our old home, which now played softly whenever Rosie wanted to dance. Tristan never reached out again. Occasionally, I heard snippets through the grapevine that he was embroiled in a mountain of debt. Some said he blamed me for his downfall. Others hinted he might be leaving the state. Perhaps the final blow to his pride was my adoption of Alina, the nurse he once belittled as a con artist. But I no longer lost sleep over his doings. I had walked through fire and come out whole on the other side, surrounded by people who genuinely cared. One morning, while sipping tea on my balcony, I held a letter in my hand, an invitation to a class reunion for retired librarians in my old district. Once I might have ignored such a thing too, wrapped up in worry or fear, but now I smiled and thought, why not? Life was an open door again, and I intended to walk through it. As I stood there letting the autumn sun warm my face, I realized that I had found something even more precious than my reclaimed freedom. I'd found family where I least expected it. I'd found that blood doesn't define love. Commitment does. And in the end, the people who stand beside you, when all the world falls away, are the people who truly deserve a place in your heart and in your will. Thank you so much for joining me today on her Fireside Stories. I hope Abigail's powerful journey reminded you that strength and dignity can overcome even the deepest betrayals. And sometimes family is found in places we never imagined. But now, I want to hear from you. Did Abigail do the right thing by adopting her nurse, Alina, as her daughter? And how did you feel about Tristan's downfall? Leave your personal opinions and insights in the comments. And don't forget to mention where you tuned in from today. I always love knowing how far our stories travel. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another inspiring story. Until next time, take care, cherish your true family, and keep your heart open to unexpected friendships. This is her Fireside Story signing off until we meet again.